There's a film by a certain director that has done many films that have been very praiseworthy over his lengthy career, and that is the name of Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright has been the man behind the Cornetto trilogy, that being Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and World's End. He also is the man behind Scott Pilgrim. He is also the man behind Baby Driver, amongst other films that are absolutely delightful. His latest work being Last Night in Soho, a British film, very, very British. And it's very hearkening to X and Pearl in some ways. At least that's how I've noticed it. There seems to be a certain trope from this year's films that there is a character, often the lady, who has dreams of making it big in a certain industry. This one here wants to be a big art student. She moves into the big city of London to go to a fashion school where she will eventually design clothes for people to wear and all that other good stuff besides. Her dreams are big, her aspirations and ambitions are also big. And with X and Pearl, X especially, you have a main character who has desires to be the biggest in the adult film industry. It's a nod at the 70s adult film industry in general. And then we have Pearl, which takes place even further back, with the person who has dreams and aspirations to be an actress, to be a star, to be a dancer, to be a singer, all of the good stuff besides. Though both X and Pearl deal in very dark and twisted little things, they are also slasher-type films at the heart of both of them. This one, while horror, is not a slasher. It's a supernatural-ish type of film, but it deals with very similar subject matter, I've noticed. Last Night in Soho details our lovely Thomasin McKenzie character here playing the lovely Louise, and she rents a bed rest, a sort of like studio apartment, whatever, in London because she doesn't like her roommates at the college, at the university. So she moves into this little bed rest, owned and operated by an elderly woman by the name of Alexandra, I think? I'm not too sure. Miss Collins. So she's there, and she loves the room. And then we find when she falls asleep in this room, she has very vivid dreams of the 1960s, of which she is also obsessed. And there she meets the lovely Anya Taylor-Joy's character of Sandy. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll figure it out right away. Sandy is short for Alexandra. Alexandra, short for Sandy. Ish is the shortened version of Sandy, whatever. And you might have already figured it out, but if you haven't, I'm not going to spoil it right away. But this is a film you gotta pay attention to, because I love the whole mystery. The first 3/4 of the film are great, and the 3 acts delve increasingly into more unnervingness. The first act is delightful. It's very lighthearted. It's very happy in tone. Now, Thomasin is not actually going back in time. I want to make that clear. She does not actually physically interact with the world around her in the way that you might expect actual time travel to be, nor is she going back in time and inhabiting the body of Anya Taylor-Joy. She is merely an observer. She observes the character of Anya Taylor-Joy and observes all of the things that happen to her. And co-starring in this film is Matt Smith, the lovely 11th Doctor. He is excellent as a villain, I have found. Both in Morbius and in this, he plays excellent villain archetypes. I don't know what it is, but he just has a certain face. He has a certain method of tirade-ness. His rants and all sorts of other things to just make him an excellent type of villain character. And you know right away, as soon as you meet the character of Jack, played by Matt Smith, there's something that he's up to no good. Now the Anya Taylor-Joy enters this little establishment, parade party, little place where she wants to get a position as a performer here. Though this is a very 5-star type classy place and she has no previous experience, naturally she's probably not going to get it. But she goes right up to the bartender and says, I want to speak to the owner of this establishment so that I can become the next big name. And the guy scoffs at her and says, why don't you go talk to Jack? He's a talent manager for girls. So she goes to talk to Jack and says that she wants to become the next big thing. And Jack immediately takes an interest in her. Though, if you know how this goes, you're going to know that he's not exactly good at his intentions with her. Naturally. So, the first act, though, he's very kind to her. A lot of things seem to be going her way. She gets a position at a new establishment, a little pub down the road. She gets a nice little stage performance going on, an audition, so to speak. She gets a position there, and at first, things seem to be lovely. Jack defends her honor in front of others. He smacks down a due person in front of everybody that was impugning her honor and all that stuff. And at first, Jack seems like the perfect thing to turn her life around and make her position in London great. And then Thomason wakes up, and she feels delightful. She has vivid memories of that stuff that she just dreamed about, and she remembers the dress that Anya Taylor-Joy was wearing, and she gets the inspiration to recreate that fashion for the modern day. And so when she returns to her class, she starts to design this dress, and her teacher, her professor, is very interested in this design. She's really encouraging her to chase this design. She goes to get her hair done, similarly to Sandy's here, Anya Taylor-Joy's character. She gets her hair done blonde to look like her. She gets similar outfits from a vintage store, and suddenly Terrence Stamp starts to stalk her. He takes an interest in her as soon as she changes her hair to Sandy's color, giving you the suspicion that Terrence might be somebody from Sandy's past. And for the moment, though, nothing comes of it. He's just a interesting, mysterious old man. And I'm just amazed that Terrence Stamp is still going today. Both Terrence Stamp and the lady who runs the bed rest, the Miss Collins, both of them are 60s stars. Back in the day, in the 60s, they were sex icons, man. And they were big in the 70s. I love that they brought those back, because these characters in the 60s are the same characters. It's just really good. It's really good. We can't spoil too much here, because there's a mystery here that you don't want spoiled to you. But I can say that the ending might not have satisfied people in the way that a lot of people wanted to be satisfied. But the direction is something that you cannot fault that for. The story is weak in the ending, but the direction, the directing, the camera work, all of that is delightfully Edgar Wright fashion, and you can't fault it for that. If you are a fan of Edgar Wright's films, you're going to come in liking this. You may not like it as much as Shaun of the Dead, you may not like it as much as Hot Fuzz, you may not like it as much as Scott Pilgrim, you may not even like it as much as Baby Driver, but you might like it more than World's End. Maybe. But while this might be on the lower end of Edgar Wright's films, this is his intro foray into a lot less comedy-centric type of film. This isn't very comedic, unlike the Cornetto trilogy, Scott Pilgrim, even Baby Driver to an extent. All those are fun type of films. The first act starts fun, then the second act starts, and you start to realize, this is getting really, really uncomfortable, and it starts to give you a realization that the 60s weren't as rose-colored glasses as our Thomason lady thought the 60s would be like. She wants to go back to the 60s. She wants to live in the 60s. She kept saying she has idolized the 60s and the fashion of the 60s and all that stuff. She listens to music of the 60s, and it's just when she goes to the 60s and realizes how difficult it was for people to make it back then, particularly women of looking repute, she starts to become disenchanted with that. In fact, she starts to become scared of it all, because the best type of horror I find after watching so many of these movies, reality is the scariest nightmare you could ever imagine. That is the truth of it. You don't need ghosts, you don't need demons, you don't need slasher villains. Reality is the greatest nightmare, and the most relatable one, which is why this film works, in my opinion. There's just enough supernaturalness in there, but the scary part of the film is not the spooky supernatural specters, but the reality of what Anya Taylor-Joy's character went through. You could feel that tension, you could feel that helplessness, especially in Thomason's, when she's having these very vivid nightmares going back to this time period and experiencing what Anya Taylor-Joy's character experienced, and that feeling of helplessness of being unable to get out of those nightmares. That you can feel. You could really feel that type of helplessness, that type of tension, and that is the terrifying, scary parts of the film, not necessarily the spooky ghosts that Thomason encounters. That's one of the weaker elements of the film. One thing I really hate in a lot of these movies is that you have a horror type of trope, usually with supernatural elements. And we've noticed it a lot in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, but we could forgive the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie for doing it because they didn't do it too much. But with this, Thomason starts to see these spooky supernatural hallucinations in the waking world more and more and more and more and often. The first couple of times, it's fine. You realize that that's part of the storytelling, but then it just keeps happening. It just keeps happening, and she keeps running away from everything. Everything she sees is a spooky, faceless ghost specter, and she starts to become really unnerved by everything, and you start to become very checking out-ishness after all of the repeated encounters, and you're like, okay, that's it, get on with it. And that's one of the weaker parts of the film. And the ending is a little bit of a weaker part, but the twist is not a weak part. In fact, the twist is excellent. You are led on to believe one thing throughout the first two acts of the film, and then the third act says, no, you're wrong. It's this instead. You're like, whoa, man, whoa, and it's really friggin' wow. And I liked that twist at the third act ending. So, at least with the twist part in the third act, it's great. Now, everything else, the ending, it's fine. It's extremely watchable. But the first two acts make this film worth your time, in my opinion. I would say the first two acts in this film are worth the price of admission. Matt Smith is perfectly casted in this. His role is excellent. He demands the screen every time he's on screen. If you're a fan of Doctor Who, you'll know who Matt Smith is, and you'll be a fan of this guy as soon as you see him on camera. He is charismatic as heck, and he is sleazy as heck. He is awesome. Anya Taylor-Joy's character, also awesome. Thomason McKenzie, she is the breakout role in this. In fact, I would argue that she outshines Anya Taylor-Joy, even. Her role in this as the deer caught in the headlights type of character, because she's from rural England, I'm guessing rural England. She's out there in the country. She's lived in the country her whole life, and then she's finally in the big city, the Big Apple, UK's Big Apple. London is huge, and it has a massive history. And this little supernatural psychic power that she has, not necessarily a power, but a sensitivity, if you will, because, power maybe might have to be it. But her ability, sensitivity, whatever, this makes it hard for her to live in the city, so to speak, because if you've watched Ghost Whisperer, man, back in the day with Ghost Whisperers seeing ghosts and crap like that, you'd imagine out in the country you wouldn't see too much, but in the big city, especially an old city that's hundreds of years old, London is probably over 1,000 years old. It has a huge. Londinium was colonized the Romans, and it's big, man. It's a lengthy historical city, and a lot of stuff happened here. You can imagine somebody sensitive to that type of stuff would see things everywhere in the big city, and that type of allegory that connects it to the anxiety that somebody from the country might even feel being in the big city, no supernatural involved, is apparent in the subject matter in this film. I would argue that they did that really well. The bad parts of the film, I would say, is the repetitiveness of the hallucinations and the kind of weakness of the third act, though the twist saves it in the end. I would overall give this a 7.5 out of 10, maybe even an 8 out of 10. It loses 2 points for those two things that I mentioned, but otherwise, it is fantastic. I enjoyed the heck out of this movie. I would watch it again. Now, there's nothing in here that you haven't seen before. Like I've said, with X, with Pearl, with a bunch of other films where a character has dreams and aspirations of making it big, and the reality of the surrounding of reality itself starts to break their ambitions and break their dreams and aspirations and make them very sad. This one, I'd say, has a decent ending. This one was able to get a little reality check on their ambitions, but they still get to have what they want at the end in some shape or form. And I'd say that Last Night in Soho is worth your attention.